Hey everybody, and welcome to the next edition of the Soccer Fitness Goals video blog. This past weekend, I attended and presented at the first ever Futsal Canada conference, and it was headed up by the organization called Futsal Canada, who are partnered with the different provincial associations in Canada as well as the Canadian Soccer Association. And the conference was all about the sport and specifically building the sport of futsal in Canada. And my presentation was, of course, about the sports science side of futsal. So I presented about the physical and physiological demands of the sport, as well as best practices for futsal coaches in the testing, training, and monitoring of their athletes. The conference was amazing. For me, it was a real revelation just to see how many people there are all across the country. And again, I say across the country because there were representatives from 6 different provinces that came to Ottawa for the weekend for the conference. How many people there are all across the country that are really interested in building and growing the sport of futsal. And I have to give a thanks and shout out to a friend and colleague of mine, and believe it or not, also a former elementary school classmate of mine named Chris Fernandez, who is heading up Futsal Canada and was the driving force behind putting that conference together. So, the topic of the blog this week is going to be the sport of futsal, and specifically 3 reasons that are based on relevant scientific literature. 3 reasons why all young Canadian soccer players should add futsal into their routine. So what's the first reason that Canadian soccer players should consider playing futsal? Well, it's because futsal is a more intense sport than soccer. In doing my research to prepare for my presentation, I came across a lot of different time motion analysis studies where players' heart rate as well as the amount of running they did was measured through heart rate monitors and GPS. And one such study that was done by a group of researchers from Spain that looked at futsal players in that country at the elite level. The lead author of the study was Barbero Alvarez, so we'll put the link to the study below me here. But that study found that on average, futsal players at the elite level were playing at an average heart rate of 90% of their maximum heart rate. And again, that was a little surprising to me because soccer is always considered to be a very intense sport. And in soccer, average heart rates are typically between 75 to 80% of max heart rate. So that means that in futsal, when the players are out there playing, they're playing at least 10 or up to 15% higher percentage of their average heart rate than soccer players. The same study also found that futsal players, when you look at their total distance covered and then what percentage of that total distance was run at a high intensity, and high intensity means fast running and sprinting, the standard being any running which is higher than 22 kilometers per hour. In futsal, the average amount of high intensity running, the average percentage of high intensity running versus the total is 22%. So that means of all the total distance that futsal players cover in a match, 22% of it is done with fast running and sprinting. And again, that's higher than conventional data that we've seen in soccer, in which even the top players are averaging somewhere between as little as 10 and maybe 15 and maybe up to 20%. But in futsal, it's over 22. So what does it mean? It means that futsal is played at a higher average heart rate, and players do more fast running and sprinting in futsal than they do in soccer. So what's the second reason that Canadian players should consider playing futsal as well as soccer? Well, not only is futsal more physically demanding than soccer, it's also more technically demanding. And again, in doing my research for my presentation, I came across studies that were conducted by the English FA and FIFA, where they analyzed the technical performance of players in futsal games. And what they found was that in futsal, you have about 5 times as many touches of the ball per minute than you do in soccer. And the numbers in futsal are between 2.6 to 2.7 touches per minute versus soccer where it's 0.5 to 0.6 touches per minute. So these increased touches on the ball, what do they lead to? Well, they lead to more opportunity to perform and execute all of the different technical abilities that involve the ball in soccer under pressure, such as dribbling, turning, cutting, close control of any kind, as well as passing and shooting. Players that play futsal are going to be touching the ball more, and that means that they're going to have a higher technical demand, and they should develop their technical abilities to a greater extent than if they just played soccer. So what's the third and final reason that Canadian players should consider playing futsal? Well, it's something that would require some more scientific research before definitive conclusions can be made, but if we extrapolate from reason number 2, which is that in futsal players touch the ball significantly more than they do in soccer, and combine that with the fact that futsal is played with only 4 outfield players and a goalkeeper and on a much smaller field, only 40 meters by 20 meters, then you can make a pretty solid assumption that in futsal there are going to be more interactions between players and their opponents. And again, because the numbers are small, those interactions are going to be centered around 1 versus 1, 2 versus 1, 2 versus 2, 3 versus 2, 3 versus 3, 4 versus 3, and of course 4 versus 4. So with all of these increased interactions between players, a pretty solid case can be made that futsal should help to not only develop players' individual technique, but also to improve their tactical awareness and their game intelligence. And the reason for this is that if a player becomes more exposed to these small-sided situations like 1v1, 2v1, etc., then over time they're going to be able to learn how best to execute in these small-sided situations. And that includes when they have the ball and also when they don't have the ball, and even when their team is in possession of the ball or when their team is not in possession of the ball. So overall, the increased touches on the ball and the increased interaction between players and opponents should lead to better tactical performance as well as physical and technical. So that's it for the Soccer Fitness Goals video blog for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. And also, I hope I've made a strong case to all young Canadian soccer players as well as coaches of young Canadian soccer players to strongly consider participating in futsal and joining a futsal league this upcoming winter season. I did mention Futsal Canada, who put on the conference this past weekend in Ottawa, so if you'd like to learn more about them and what they're doing, we'll put the link to their website underneath me now. It's www.futsalcanada.ca. Please remember to like our video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. We'll put that link underneath me now. And of course, if you haven't done so already, but you're interested in downloading our app that provides the world's only customized soccer-specific at-home fitness training program, you can do so via the link underneath me now. We'll see you next week, and until then, keep reaching your soccer fitness goals.